Hello and welcome to all our viewers around the world. You've tuned in to Georgina's Stripping the Dipping, and as usual, you're joined by your usual co-host Denzel Clarkson, aka Amg Denz. And listen, it's not every day we get to chat with a former F1 senior engineer from a championship-winning team. So I would love to obviously introduce our guest today, Engine Mode 11, aka Dan. It's such a cool tag name as well because for those who don't know or live underneath a rock, Honda have this kind of cool like strap kind of line where they'll tell Max engine mode 11 position 5, and we know that's when the VTEC kicks in. So without further ado, Dan, how are you doing today? And for all our listeners at home, could you explain what your previous role in F1 was related to?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thank you, and thank you for having me. So I worked at Redbull Racing for 6 years, and my role basically, the easiest way to explain it is connecting all the systems together. So that's like factory, the wind tunnel, trackside, and making sure all the relevant data got to the correct places, as well as the links to the FIA for regulation purposes and things like that. So a little bit of everything, really, to be honest.
Excellent. And, it sounds like such a very broad, encompassing role as well, working for Red Bull, having those tasks and responsibilities. And just kind of as a starting point there, Dan, like, how did you get the role at Red Bull? And did you know that you always specifically wanted to work with them individually? Or had it been maybe if a different team had approached you or given you the opportunity, would you have taken that up with them at the same time?
Yeah, so like getting into F1 for me was complete luck. I was working as a senior engineer in a financial bank in London. So, like Wolf of Wall Street, but less glamorous.
And less cocaine.
Yeah,
Kids, don't do
yeah.
drugs.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then I had a phone call one day from like a withheld number. And I don't know about you, but I just hate answering withheld numbers. And I thought this time, no, I'm going to answer this. So I answered it, and it was an agency working on behalf of Red Bull. And they were like, oh, we found your CV. Are you interested in applying for this position at Red Bull? And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, because I'm a fan of Formula One before. Never really thought I'd work for a team. And I think at that stage, any team I would have worked for, to be honest, just to have the chance to be in F1.
That's so cool. And again, it just goes to show that maybe it's not the conventional way that people necessarily get picked up by Formula One teams. But again, if you have like an outstanding CV and that you've done well and you've got the connections and stuff like that with people on LinkedIn, which we'll touch on probably later on, that you can gain these opportunities. And I'm not actually give you more credit, Dan. I'm not going to say that it's just luck. I think in this life, you have to create your own luck. And it's so awesome that you're able to take that route into the team as well, because, Red Bull, even 6 years ago, they were no slouches. They had already had a bit of success with Sebastian Vettel, and the team was already a very big machine and operating in spaces, that only the elites would imagine. So that's really insightful to learn. And the next question I was going to ask you as well, Dan, was could you give us more insight into what was your favorite parts of the job? What would you say were the hardest parts of your role in your position?
Yeah, my favourite part was whenever I was trackside, I think. And it's probably odd to say, but after 6 years, it loses the magic a little bit because you're so used to it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah, so like by the end of it, like standing next to a Formula One car in a garage was just like an everyday sort of thing for me. It didn't really faze me, but at the beginning it was, I was probably walking around looking like I was lost because I was just so sort of like fanboy and like, oh, look, there's a car, oh, things like that. And but the hardest part is probably adjusting to the different time zones because a lot of my job also involved remote support back in the factory in Milton Keynes. So then you got to switch on to the time zone that they're at trackside. So I wasn't sad when Australia was cancelled for 2 years.
And now it's back.
Yeah, now it's back, but I've gone now, so that's okay.
Fair enough. And just to kind of touch on that point as well, Dan, you've mentioned there that one of the most trickiest parts of it, I guess, is adapting to time zones and obviously the laborious traveling as well. That's non-stop. Where do you sit in relation to maybe Liberty Media extending the calendar? And we've had maybe some rumors of there being at some stage a 30 race like championship. Like, there's some fans out there which would love the thought of it because they just love racing and they want to have more of it within the season, which is understandable. But then I guess a lot of people would empathize with the position you were in at such time ago and what like current staff and mechanics and engineers go through now. Like, do you think it would be fair or sustainable to have so many races on the calendar, or could it be achieved if more money and more time was spent in making that sustainable?
Yeah, I've had this discussion quite a few times, and in my opinion, it sort of boils down to 30 races a season for a single set of staff isn't achievable. We have, even now with some of the triple headers, there'll be some members of staff that are out of the country for a month, where they're just constantly traveling from one venue to the next. And that's all good and well if you're young, free and single. But if you're like me and married with children, you don't want to be away from your house for a month. It's just too much.
Sure.
So the way I looked at it and suggested was there needs to be a provision in the cost cap to allow for like a rotating set of staff. Because at the moment they don't allow that. And all the staff at lower level, as it were, all count towards the cost cap. But if you take that element out of it and you can say hire 30 extra people that can rotate in and out, you're going to, release a lot of the pressure mentally that are on those guys if they're going to be out the country for 30 weeks at a time.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on there as well. And it's a tough balancing act because, like you said, we're all human at the end of the day, and no one wants to be like spending a month away from their family, their kids, or their loved ones, just because of their job. And there's not many jobs where you'll have to sacrifice that amount of time away. But at the same time, too, like with the suggestion you've made, if they were to reconsider and restructure the cost cap and allow maybe to have like rotating staff, a bit like we even had in football with like the extra substitutions and stuff like that as well, then maybe they might be able to push towards their very ambitious goals, I must say myself. And also indirectly, they might even create more jobs inadvertently as well for people, because that's a big thing. We're always like talking about creating diversity and more opportunities for people, that necessarily might not get the chance to be in the sport, to get, the day in the sun of such. And maybe by doing that, that would also give them the opportunity as well. So I'm very thankful that you've given us that insight there. And it's very interesting to see. So I'll move on to some of Georgina's questions as well, because as always, shout out to Georgina. She's always doing her research, and she's really the backbone of these podcasts. I just like come here and talk. She's the one that does all the thought planning and processing and networking, and I think she needs a lot more credit for what she does. But to bring it back to you, Dan, one of the questions that she was wanting me to find out from yourself was what insight could you give us in relation to the design philosophy of this new Red Bull RB18? She's quite like specifically picked out the double diffuser. So for those at home, I want you to just imagine the rear end of the Red Bull. I guess a majority of you probably wouldn't like that. But anyway, we'll start there. And essentially, you've got like the lower part just underneath the rear crash protection beam with the strakes underneath it, which probably connects to the Venturi tunnels underneath the car. But then also just near the exhaust, like above the ERS management light as well, there's like it's almost like a mustache. There's like a fairing or kind of like a double kind of like aero device just on the seat of the exhaust or nearby it as well that looks like it's doing something to increase airflow there. Could you give us much insight into that, and what it would have been like as well, maybe working near or with a person like Adrian Newey in that regard?
Yeah, so when I left at the end of December last year, the car that I saw that was in the wind tunnel was completely different to what we actually ended up with, which I think is probably a testament to how quickly this development life cycle is happening. It's going to be the same for all the teams.
Sure.
But in terms of, like you say, you see these weird like mustaches, as you like to call them, I like that term. I'm going to use that. And
Nigel Mansell, especially.
yeah, the Nigel Mansell rear beam. It's like if there's a part on a car, like your steering arm and things like that, your wishbones, if you can also make that do another task in like aero, so shaping it to be like a wing, then they're absolutely always going to not abuse it, but what's the word I'm looking for? Incorporate that into their design. So, we're talking Adrian Newey. This isn't his first rodeo with ground effect cars. It's, where he started back with Williams and whatnot. So it's a very Adrian thing to do, to basically look at a part of the car which you think would be quite irrelevant, but then all of a sudden it's now become integral to the aero philosophy. So, yeah, I mean, it went through, I've probably lost count the amount of the designs I've seen. And like I say, the one that we've ended up at track is I've not even seen that one before. So
Wow, again, and that's just really intriguing and like interesting to take away as well. That, like, as you said, like nothing ever stays still, and we had like Bryson, another like very great technically minded person as well, to give us insight. And I think he said something along the lines of, if you stay still in Formula One, it's the equivalent of taking 2 steps back, which I agree with, and it's so true that the teams are always looking to exploit the rules to find ways of like making the car behave a certain way that's going to enhance the design philosophy of the car. And I think that's a great segue into the next question that Georgina had put forward as well. At the beginning of the season, or beginning of the year, Christian and Helmut had been doing their rounds of work with the media. And of course they weren't trying to hide at all that maybe the car was a bit slightly overweight, this RB18, compared to what they would have liked in reality. The question really is, Dan, is how easy is it for a Formula One team to shed the weight from a car without subsidizing its performance? And also, I mean, we actually touched on this earlier, so I'm gonna like double barrel the question to you in a way. Is it contradictory that the FIA have like these cost cap measures which stop the teams from being able to like go crazy with spending, but for a team like Red Bull that are looking to extract every single tenth on the circuit, they're going to want to probably invest in more expensive materials that are going to help them lessen the weight of the car to regain that performance?
Yeah, so I'll start off with the first question in terms of cars being overweight. And this isn't just a Red Bull thing. I've heard it from other people throughout the paddock as well, in that I don't think I can think of a single car that started the season the way it should have been. I think it's one of those things where it's easier to lose weight than it is to add weight. You can cut out various parts of the structure. I've seen people with hacksaws at winter testing literally just cutting bits off underneath the car to try again.
Jeez.
And then you look for a more permanent solution during the year. But it also very depends on the actual weight level as well. If we're talking, I don't know, anything above 20 kilos, you've got a major problem there. But the levels we're talking about, I think like 10 to 15, I don't think anyone's actually officially given any figures, but you can certainly make up that deficit by being more inventive with your sort of structures, your carbon, and just changing some of the materials as well, like really, really sort of inane things. There was a project that I worked on that involved saving, I think it was 60 grams. And
wow,
the amount of money they spent just to save 60 grams was mental. We're talking 6 figures easily, and it was like just for 60 grams.
That's not even
nothing.
Like a pack of Skittles. Like
no.
That's ridiculous. Oh,
I know, right? So yeah, but these are very clever people, and I fully believe they'll do it. And then in regards to the other question, the cost cap. I've got a bit of a problem or a bit of an issue with the cost cap in that I don't really see the point of it if the lower teams aren't even spending the amount of it.
Okay.
I understand, obviously, you want to cap the big guys, so Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull. But these teams are so large anyway, it's not necessarily about the spending at their level, it's about the efficiencies that they've got.
True.
So, these big companies are super efficient. But then you got like the little ones, like say that's Haas, for example. There's no way they're going to spend anywhere near that cost cap. So what's it doing for them? Nothing really. You know, to be competitive this year, they had to sacrifice an entire year last year, and that's not feasible moving forward for the health of, well, for new teams. If they want to come in, they're not going to want to look at that and go, if we have a bad year, we have to write off another year before we're competitive. So I think there's work to be done with the cost cap, and I would much rather see a more fairer distribution of prize money to assist with that.
Yeah, and I agree, and it's really intriguing that you've touched on that point there as well. And we know that teams like Ferrari, they have like a legacy bonus. So for those who don't know at home, like Ferrari essentially, wherever they finish in the championship, they finish. And also they just get an additional bonus on top of that because they're one of the initial teams that were in Formula One since its inception. So they get a bonus that carries throughout. And like you mentioned there as well, Dan, I think it is unfair to the smaller teams. And we're looking to try and expand Formula One. There's been talks about potentially the Volkswagen Audi Porsche group coming in, I think after 2023 or 2025 when they resimplify the hybrid elements of the power units and as such. And of course new teams too. We've seen the teams like like Haas come in. They've got a completely, I guess, new way of doing things, being a customer team, buying listed parts from Ferrari, and then getting their own guys from around the world to try and assemble everything and put it together. But as you touched on there as well, like, what's the point of having the cost cap? And it's not just basically capping how much money the teams could spend, as you said, but to summarize as well, like the ways that the team are efficient with their resources, their facilities, their people, and how they go about it. And even Aston Martin, they've kind of come out and I think it was Mike Crack and also Lawrence Stroll coming out and saying that they might even sacrifice this year so they can build a factory and use their sponsorship money to do other things, which is great for the long term, of course. But people look at how competitive you could be now, and that's not quite it. So I definitely agree with your points there, and definitely a lot to be taken away from that. But then bringing it on to the next question as well, Dan, I wanted to lean more on your experiences at Red Bull, and by no means am I trying to dig you out at all, because I know that there's certain things that you probably
It's
understand.
okay. I don't need any help with that, mate.
Sure, sure. But just to kind of like dig into this one, like, what was the culture like working at Red Bull? Because we know that they're not a typical manufacturer like Mercedes or Ferrari. At times, Christian and Helmut can be very controversial at times with things that they'll say and the PR machine that they run. Did you see much diversity at the team? And what would you say were the core values of Red Bull, like, being an outfit in the way that they are in the sport?
Yeah, so I think Red Bull have been in the sport for so long now. Sometimes it's easy to forget that they are just there for marketing purposes. They aren't like there to sell cars like Ferrari and Mercedes are. So you see this big juggernaut of a team, and it's just sort of mad to sit there and think it came from an energy drink. That's not so applicable now because, like I say, they've been there for so long. They're there on merit now. But like culture-wise, I like you say, sometimes when those two talk in the media, it's alarming, let's say, and how can I put it? It's almost like sometimes there's two different people. There's the ones that's talking the media, and then there's the ones that you interact with every day, and they don't match up. I've never seen or experienced any issues within the team. Culture-wise, it's healthy. And I think there is a good representation of people there. It could be better, but I think it's fair to say it could be better in all the teams. Yeah. So work to be done for sure. But like we say, that's true of all teams at the moment. And hats off to Lewis Hamilton for what he's doing to shine a spotlight on that. I think that's, if it's making people feel uncomfortable, then good. That's, they're the conversations that need to be had.
Absolutely, and I agree with you on that second point as well. It's that's the thing. We want to see positive change, and sometimes to provoke that, you need to piss people off, unfortunately, or almost kind of make them question themselves as well. So I think that's fair, and I'm really satisfied and pleased with your answer there as well, Dan, because you've been honest, and like you said as well, I think it's not just a thing that you could apply just necessarily to Horner or Helmet. You see that in real life too, like when you have your bosses, like when they're just chatting to you individually, they might be really cool, and they might just like treat you as a person, and they might want to know more stuff about your personal life and be really relatable. But then obviously when they're on the grand stage, and maybe the team has performed well, but it's not been winning championships the way it used to, there's a pressure that comes with that. And with that pressure, you're going to have to start like moving a certain way to reassert your authority, and bring respect and credibility back to the brand as well. So I understand it from that perspective, and I'm sure the viewers at home get it too. And it's not necessarily that just because they're perceived one way in the media that they're like that in their own personal lives as well. So yeah, I'm glad we touched on that. But then, to make your life easier, because I'm not going to do that to you on this platform. A very intriguing question. Again, Georgina, she's the star when it comes to questions like this. And this was a good question. She said, what have you noticed with Max Verstappen's driving style that's enabled him to adapt to the more trickier cars that we've seen previously, like the RB15 with Gasly and the RB16 with Albon? And I guess you can almost invert the question. Why is it that his teammates have historically struggled to get on top of the balance of the car as quickly as he has?
Yeah, so I think with Verstappen, it's almost like he drives without any fear. Now, with Albon and Gasly, I think those two had their own sort of individual issues. I think the problem with Gasly was that he lost his confidence. And once you lose your confidence, it just sort of ends up in this vicious downward spiral,
Mhm.
which, look what happened. We've taken him out of the team, put him in an AlphaTauri, and now he's driving, really well. He absolutely warrants a seat at a big team.
Mhm.
I don't think it'll be with Red Bull. I'd be surprised because I think even Gasly's come out in the media in the past and said, no, I don't want to go back to Red Bull. But we'll see. And in terms of Albon, I think he was just too inexperienced to make that jump because I think, was he only in AlphaTauri for 6 months or whatever it was before he got bumped up to Red Bull.
Mhm.
And this is the thing. I think all the Red Bull cars, they seem to have this inherent design where they're almost permanently on a knife edge. They're not easy to drive. So I think with Verstappen's aggression and his sort of fearless attitude, it works well for him. But the other guys, I think, struggle to adapt because it's not as forgiving, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that's true of all Adrian Newey cars actually as well. If you go back in history, I think a lot of people say that a lot of the Adrian cars are a bit knife edge in terms of their handling. You're sort of right on the limit and there's no warning, it just goes sort of thing. So yeah, but it was sad to see what happened to Gasly and Albon, but at the end of the day, it's a sport and a business. So
Well, exactly that, Dan. Points make prizes, and in any business, not just Formula One, if you underperform or if you don't do well, they don't keep you, and that's
mhm.
always just been the case. And with Red Bull, it's clear, that whilst certain people, I guess, might have their things with them, and we're not going to really delve into that too much today. Like, you have to at least give them credit in a sense of they're not the conventional team, and although they've been around longer than a lot of other teams that are now on the grid, still, just for them to have like their own car, their own team, now they're heading up their own power unit, obviously with the support of Honda, but still they're in custody of that engine. You have to give them a lot of credit in that sense. And if you got one apple or one bad apple, that could definitely spoil the bunch. But at the same time, I want to be fair to Gasly and Albon too. It is the circumstances that they were put in were quite hard because people obviously rate Max Verstappen as a new generational driver, and I think what probably gets left out, as you mentioned too, is just that as well as the physical part of the sport and training and having a good car, it's also the mental element of it as well. Are you ready to race at the big team? Do you have the confidence, to drive a car? Like you rightfully touched on as well. Adrian Newey's always had like a high rake concept. For those who don't know, whenever you look at a Red Bull car, it might not be so prominent this year because we moved to ground effect cars and they're just much more lower to the ground anyway. But if you were to look at like the RB16B compared to like the Mercedes W12, the Red Bull, the rear end of the car is always higher than the front. So essentially that gives you like more, I guess, like almost I guess like more capabilities in terms of corner entry and just the way that the car would behave and characteristics, and it's more of an emphasis on the aerodynamics than it is necessarily the power unit. But then obviously with that as well, it requires a certain driving style, a certain precision, maybe a fearlessness like Dan touched on there as well, in terms of maximizing the potential. But also I guess just to caveat this question finally as well, like, do you also see it, Dan, that maybe it's the fact that Max has been renowned for being like one of the newer drivers in this sim racing generation? And he talks quite a lot about going online with his friends and like testing different theories online or in the simulator or on iRacing, and maybe bringing some of those ideas, although it's a simulator and it's not ever as like close as the real thing. Do you see any of that transferability in the way he approaches his driving, and maybe the fact that he does a lot of sim racing, which is one of his hobbies, but may also give him a edge of sharpness?
Yeah, I think this new generation, like we've said, yeah, growing up now with all these iRacing simulators and the power to do some really in-depth stuff from your bedroom, getting that ingrained into their head while they're young certainly is a benefit when they're in the simulator. And it also helps them understand sort of the feel and like the results they're getting out the simulator. So I think it definitely does help. But I wouldn't expect the world's best sim racer to be able to go out into a car and do anything too meaningful. There is a big step from simulator to real life. So yeah, I think it definitely does help, and it's a new generation. Like we got the F1 esports now. All the teams have an esports team, which is something I never thought we'd ever see. So yeah, it is all a bit crazy now, isn't it, with these young ones, as I say, like a boomer.
Exactly. Like, listen, Dan, when I was growing up, well, I say it like I'm like 50 or 60 years old, but even me being 26 now, like 13 years ago, 20 years ago, I had a PlayStation 1. I was banging F1 2000 with like the likes of a Jordan and a McLaren. And that was it, and to see how far like sim technology has come forward and how competitive it's become as well is so intriguing. But at the same time, like you mentioned as well, there still is a skill gap between sim and real life racing. And although I think we probably will see an emergence of esports drivers making it into like F3, F2 feeder leagues as such, and
Yeah.
perhaps maybe one day making that step, there's still a long way to go. But it's so cool just to see the kind of the comparisons and also how transferable some of the skills and I guess mindsets are and philosophies too. So that's cool. And bringing it to the next question then. This one's from me. What was it like as a team transitioning from Renault to Honda power units in your time there at the team? And have you been surprised at all about how competitive the Honda PU has been in comparison to the likes of Mercedes and Ferrari over the last 2 or 3 seasons? And well, actually, I'll let you answer that bit, and then I'll come back with maybe another extension to that question.
Yeah, so when I started, there was this big sort of story going around that we weren't going to have engines for next year because it was at the peak of the Renault Fallout.
Mhm.
And I remember signing my contract, and the guy who was dealing with me and interviewing me, that goes, "You do realise that we don't even know if we're going to be on the grid next year." And this
Wow.
was in like December, so I was like, "Oh yes, I'll sign it. What's the worst that could happen?" And they obviously sorted it out with Bernie's help, I understand. Bernie was like a sort of middleman to negotiate between Red Bull and Renault to get them to run the engines, but under that Tag Heuer branding. And that whole relationship was very, from my limited experience dealing with it, it seemed very tense and and strained. There was certain facilities that we had in the factory in Milton Keynes that they could have put the engine on and done some work with it, but Renault didn't want to do that. They were like, no, we'll use our own, even though their facilities were like 10 years out of date or something. And it was just very weird and odd that they weren't willing to let us help them. It was almost like they were very proud and they weren't willing to sort of accept that help, which is fair enough. I mean, it's their engine. If they don't want the help, fair enough. But Honda were like the complete opposite. They were just like, yeah, we've got a factory. We'll set it up in Milton Keynes. We can, 10 minutes down the road, we'll talk, we'll work together, sort of thing. And it paid off dividends, as we've seen. So yeah, it was night and day difference between them.
Yeah, that's a real like mind opener as well, because we had a lot of the pundits like Martin Brundle and Ted Kravitz saying that the relationship with Honda and Red Bull is a lot more better and there's more synergy there compared to Red Bull and Renault, because maybe like Red Bull were allowed to like have more input with the incorporation of the Honda power unit, and as well as that as well, Honda were being respectful to Red Bull, and in a way I guess as well like open to ideas, changes, and that's how you develop as a team. But then also, like you touched on there as well, I mean, although their stubbornness, I guess, didn't really pay off for Renault in the sense of them not allowing Red Bull to give them that additional support. I could kind of see why as well, why they might have been a bit stubborn, because of course they have their own team. So it might have been a case where they're happy to supply Renault, but Red Bull, sorry. But at the same time, they might not wanted to give them the absolute edge that maybe they were looking for with their own like works team. And at the same time as well, maybe an element of pride and ego, because they had like obviously provided the four engines that had won Red Bull the championships between 2010 to 13 as well. And sometimes I feel it's good for like works teams and teams like Red Bull to change engine suppliers, because it turns like everybody's head upside down as such, and it makes you have to work maybe in a different way and see different ways of working cultures and practices that maybe wouldn't have been incorporated before. And you
Yeah.
touched earlier on like diversity and the such, and I guess in a way that is an element of diversity, because you've got a completely Japanese manufacturer. They have their own working customs and principles and ways of doing that, and I'm sure obviously to get the maximum of the engine and to kind of propel Red Bull where they wanted to be, there was like a kind of culture learning process between the two, and ultimately it's given them a very strong platform, obviously last year and this year as well.
Yeah, and also as well, another sort of amusing little fact is that a number of the Renault engineers, when they heard we were going to Honda, they actually left and joined Honda so they could continue working with us, which I thought,
Wow.
which was quite funny. So they ended the season wearing a Renault shirt, and then when we saw them for winter testing, they were wearing a Honda shirt, which I thought was quite funny.
Oh my days. That's like like when you play F1 2021 on the video game, and like it's the same faces of the same mechanics
Yeah.
regardless of what team it is. So like, oh, I recognize your face. You were with me when I was at Renault or whatever. But yeah, that's really funny. But at the same time, it just goes to show you that maybe loyalty isn't everything in Formula One. But in a sense, if there's a particular like vision, or if you can get on board with a particular team's visions for the future, then you're gonna go with that side and that team. And it's good, I guess, from Red Bull's perspective as well, that at least they had some familiar faces and it wasn't just completely starting from ground zero again. So that's really cool insight to hear. And I guess to caveat the question as well there, Dan, like so far as the 2022 season goes, we've not had crazy reliability concerns with the kind of the Red Bull powertrain branding as such. But we had three cars not finish the first race, and then not poor Yuki didn't even get to do a
I know.
qualifying lap
I know.
or start the race. But do you see the reliability being an issue long term into the season? And also for fans at home, like we learned to an extent that some of the engine components, they're not completely locked off until September. Could you explain how that works for the viewers at home or listeners at home?
Yeah, so in terms of the reliability side, I think that was always a possibility when you basically move in your head of operations from another country as well as another like company. There's always going to be like those growing pains and adjustments. So I think the two failures in Bahrain, I don't actually think they were related to anything Honda. I think that was more of a Red Bull Racing sort of mess up
Mhm.
in terms of something they were doing with the fuel line. I don't know. But yeah. And then I've forgotten, what was your other question? I've forgotten already.
I know it's okay, and I do apologize because sometimes there's so many questions we want to ask you guys, and I just have to find like like a very concise way of like almost like integrating them into one or packaging them like how Red Bull package a Honda engine. So I apologize for that, but yeah, just could you explain kind of how the
Oh yeah,
cutoff deadline works with September?
yeah, yeah. So we've had the ice and all of that frozen. So by frozen, it means you'll send off the specs to the FIA for homologation purposes, and then the one that's in September is, I can't remember the exact parts, but it's in relation to the hybrid system, so the battery and I think the MGUH.
Mhm.
But yeah, they've basically done it in steps just to make it a bit easier for the teams to make sure they're happy before they lock it all off, and we end up with one team dominating for the next 4 years. But hey,
Yeah, which
I've had
not that we
eight
haven't had it
years of it,
before, but
so
yeah.
yeah.
Fair enough. And another kind of a good segue question linking into that as well. So far in the season, we've seen a strong fight between Ferrari and also Red Bull for the championship. Where do you see Mercedes in this? Do you think for them, by the time they fix the issues with their car, it might be a bit too late, or do you think that Mercedes still have a chance maybe for this championship from your perspective?
Yeah, I think this season it might be a bit too much of a stretch for Mercedes. I mean, I like their concept. I think it's a real clever idea, and I think there's a lot of sort of rumors and hearsay and things like that saying there's an issue with the Mercedes engine, but I don't actually believe that's the case at all. I think it's just really unfortunate that all of the Mercedes powered teams are all the ones that are struggling. So like Aston, McLaren, Williams, and Mercedes themselves, they're all having to make some pretty extreme compromises on their setup, which is, affecting them in terms of the speed traps, because people look at the speed traps and just think that's a outright
Power.
indicator of power, but it's just not true. These engines are so complex now. It's not, you can't just look at a peak power figure and go, oh yeah, that's the best. It's a lot more than that now. It's the recovery, how efficient is the recovery, how much can they deploy, how much can the energy store take. It's a lot more than just peak power output now. So I don't think there's any huge concerns at Mercedes. I mean, I've seen on some graphs that there's a bit of clipping on the straights. And for people that don't know what clipping is, it's basically as you get towards the end of the straight, the hybrid runs out of charge. So you see it in George Russell in Saudi Arabia. His speed on the straight actually slowly declines before he gets to the braking zone. And that's just where he's run out of hybrid power. Luckily, like we mentioned just now, there's not a freeze on the hybrid system yet. And I think Mercedes are the last team to actually do a major upgrade on their hybrid system. I know Ferrari had one major one last year. I think Honda did as well before they left. I'm not sure about Alpine's. But yeah, I mean, there's still time for Mercedes to turn around and say, okay, let's change it. But I think they're going to have a real big jump in performance as soon as they sort out this porpoising issue. And I think that's their major sticking point at the moment.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. And yeah, it's been just intriguing to kind of see how they've been dealing with it. At the moment, nobody really seems too stressed out there. But of course, when you're a constructors championship, a constructor's leader for the last 8 years. Even just the success of it alone overwhelms me when I think about that. So, yeah, like at some point, I guess you are gonna start feeling that pressure, and if you're not the one at the top, part of the podium spraying the champagne, the motivations of the team might start to decrease, and it will become harder and harder for them. So, for their sake as well, I hope that they can get on top of those issues. And then on the topic of cars as well, Dan, I wanted to put forward this one to you. What has been your favorite Red Bull car of like all time? Maybe one that you've worked on, maybe just one out of the entire legacy of cars that you've had so far. And what's your like favorite Formula One car of all time? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a Red Bull.
Oh, okay. So my favorite Red Bull car is probably the RB11. Now, the reason that's my favorite is because it was the first one that I worked on as part of a tyre test we did like way back in 2016, I think. So it was the old V8, and I stood next to it when that fired up, and it's the weirdest feeling because you feel it in your chest. That's how loud the V8s are.
Wow.
It's like this weird, it's like someone's tapping on your chest, and it's crazy. And then compared to the hybrids, I wouldn't recommend it, but you could stand in the garage with your ears uncovered with the hybrids. It's a bit loud and it's a bit annoying, but with the V8s, if you went in there without ear protection, you're going to come out and your ears are going to be bleeding, sort of thing. It was the difference was insane. My favorite F1 car of all time, though, that's a good question. Now, I don't know if I have a favorite of all time. Let me have a little think. What's my favourite of all time? No, see, I don't think I've got one.
Okay, is that like an era of car maybe? Like, people obviously talk about Colin Chapman and the Lotus days. Then obviously as well, you've got the McLaren kind of Senna, Honda days as well, and design language of those cars. Adrian Newey, as we know as well, had a stint at Williams, and even McLaren too, which a lot of people favor. There's a lot of errors, man. Surely there must be one, no?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people, like you say, look at the classic era and things like that. Whereas I've never really been that bothered about the classic era and things like that. I mean, I respect it and respect the drivers, but I just something about them that never did anything for me. But I think the V8 era was certainly one that piqued my interest the most. I tell you what, if there's going to be a favourite, I'm going to pick the Brawn just purely because of what they did.
Blown diffuser, 2009.
Yeah, and what they achieved with so little time and money, I have to respect that.
Well, it's a great story and funny in a way related to you because again it started off with Honda at the peak of like the financial crash or the recession of 2008. Honda said they were going to pull out of the sport, and then they had this like team of loads of employees that didn't have anywhere to go, and then Ross Brown was like, oh, okay, I'll buy the team. I've got good links with Mercedes, and that was probably the undoing of McLaren when McLaren went from being like the sole, or if not main, Mercedes-powered team, and then Mercedes came in as their own thing after. But more so, Braun orchestrated that Mercedes deal as well with the chassis. And like you said, it was just a very short turnover time. They basically found a loophole with the regulations to have this blown diffuser, which gained them a lot of performance. And yeah, like by the time other teams could get onto it and really try and incorporate it into their own design philosophies, it's already too late, and
damage is done.
And Barrichello, of course, had already distributed that damage and walking away with the championship. So yeah, that's a really cool car. It has a great story behind it, and I think for many years to come, when like the next generation of Formula One fans are doing podcasts and we become the boomers, they will probably I hope that they see the significance and importance of like cars and teams like that as well, because stories like that are so legendary. So that's pretty cool. And okay, we're gonna come towards the end of this session soon, Dan, because I'm conscious of taking up your time. But what are your predictions for the Melbourne Grand Prix specifically? What are your top 3 finishing order, and what are your predictions for the rest of the season?
Okay, so I'm probably going to play it a bit safe and say I think Ferrari is still going to be up and running and right up the front. But I'm going to be a bit spicy as well and say that I think Mercedes are going to have a little bit of a resurgence.
Wait.
Because I think they're bringing some new upgrades to Australia. Nothing major, obviously, because it's too far away. But I think I'm going to give the Mercedes fans some hope, and I'm going to say you might be on for a podium.
Hey, well, thank you, Dan. We would take that any day of the week because
I know
we
it's
need
been
that
tough.
right now. We need that. But yeah, and how about your expectations for the rest of the seasons as well?
I think Ferrari are going to walk it. I think their power unit has really come on strong. I think the car, aero-wise, is strong. I think Charles and Carlos are an incredible pairing. We saw last year just how, I think, was it a point between them? And all right, Carlos has been a bit struggling this, first two races, but I think those two are I think those two are probably the strongest pairing on the grid until we see a bit more from George and Lewis. I'll say it's their pairing that are the strongest. So, and
Sure.
I think it's going to be in a point where Ferrari walk away with it, because I think if Mercedes do improve, I think Mercedes are going to be spending so much time taking points of Red Bull and vice versa that it's just going to let Ferrari sort of run away with it, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's so true. We could see something like we actually just touched on it with the whole Braun situation, and Ferrari seem like they've really got a hold on these rules and regulations quite well, and the car doesn't ever look like it's ever been like the third slowest car. It always looks like it's been in the top two, which is what the Tifosi and I guess the neutral fans were like looking forward to as well. And then circling back to another point you mentioned there as well, because we were on the topic of like teammates and stuff. How have you seen Sergio Perez's incorporation into Red Bull over the last year and a bit? And of all the teammates that Max has had, so we've had the likes of Ricardo, we've had the likes of Gasly and Albon just in his Red Bull kind of days. Where do you see Sergio there? And were you surprised by his qualifying performance last weekend?
I wasn't surprised, and I'll tell you why. And it's because these new regulation cars require a very different driving style from what we've had in the past. You have to be really smooth and steady with them, which is, you can see it because some of the teams are even doing 2 warm-up laps just to get the tyres into the correct temperature. And with Sergio, he's always been that sort of smooth, consistent style. And now with this era of cars, excuse me, I think it's going to pay off for him. I don't think he's going to beat Max, but I think he's going to be a lot closer this year. And we've already seen it with his qualifying. So hopefully he can continue with that. So yeah, I wasn't massively surprised. I was a little bit surprised at how far off he was last year, but I gave him a pass on that purely because it's a new team, and I don't think you can make comparisons in the first season. I think everyone's owed one season.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is like an adaptation period. And then as well for Perez, not to kind of defend him too much, but he'd been through a lot. He'd gone through the thing with the whole Racing Point merger into Aston Martin. He was the one that triggered the administration process when it was Force India. Then obviously he learned that he was going to lose his seat to Vettel. And then at the very last minute, I guess Helmut and Christian were like, you know what? This guy's kind of decent. Let's give him a run whilst we have nothing else in the cards. And
exactly.
towards the end of the season, you could see that he's starting to pick it up a bit more. He had some very tasty battles with Lewis at Turkey and I think Abu Dhabi as well. And even just how much it meant to him getting his first race win in Azerbaijan, although Max had the tire blowout, and then getting a podium in his home race as well last year. You could see that it really, really means a lot to Checo, and it's so funny as well when you see him with his dad and just how much it means
brilliant.
to them. That's a great story. So yeah, absolutely. And then I want to leave the podcast, this episode, down on a powerful note, and for the younger viewers as well, because I think it was so intriguing to kind of hear your break through into Formula One.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily the most I guess stereotypical or most traditional way, right, of getting in. But my question to you would be, what advice could you give to those young and brilliant students from STEM related study backgrounds that want to get into F1? And how do they go about getting work experience or building up a network of potential employees that they could work with in the future, perhaps?
Yeah, so, I think if there's anyone listening to this and they're at the school level, I think just focus on your maths and sciences. And then in terms of university, look for a university that participates in the Formula Student program, because I know that's looked quite highly upon by a lot of the teams if people have got experience in that. If you're at university, then a lot of the teams now do like a yearly placement for a lot of students. It's highly competitive, and look, I wish I had a magic answer, but some of it will just come down to pure luck. Once, I think if you get one of those placements, then it's 9 times out of 10 it's a guaranteed job at the end of it. So that's good. And look, if you're like me, I dropped out of college. I didn't go to university. It doesn't mean you can't do F1. You just got to work hard in your vocational ability and get relevant experience. So for F1, they look quite highly on ex-armed forces, because obviously that's quite regimental and disciplined, and as well as like the aeronautics industry, so aircraft maintenance, things like that. That translates quite well into F1 mechanics and things like that. So there are always options. And look, if you don't, the worst thing they can say is no, right? That's what I always say. If you see a job, you don't think you're qualified for it, apply anyway. The worst thing they can say is no, and then maybe they turn around and say, actually, you'll be a better fit for another role or something like that. So always shoot your shot, I say. And, just follow the teams on LinkedIn. They nearly all post their open positions at LinkedIn. And that's the best way to sort of see them and get involved with the people that are responsible for hiring and firing. So, listen, nothing's impossible.
Oh, thank you, Dan. Honestly, that's even put a smile on my face, because although it might be too late for me, like for the kids out there, I hope that you're listening and taking this in, because Dan's given us some golden nuggets here. Shout out to the cereal as well, called Golden Nuggets. Give us an endorsement one day. But no, seriously, bringing it back to it. Yeah, it just goes to show that, it's never too late. You shouldn't give up on your dreams. If you really desire something and you really want it that badly, you should always work hard to get it. And sometimes not getting what you want can be almost like a blessing in disguise, because it could open up something completely different for you that you wouldn't have foreseen happening before. And yeah, Formula One is not going anywhere. It's not going down. It's going up. It's on an up trajectory. We've got new news of a completely new circuit with Las Vegas being added next year as well. There's so many opportunities out there. So, I know it's very easy these days to look at the doom and gloom and to say to yourself, I'll never be good enough, or, I've got to go to Oxford and Cambridge to get this opportunity. That's not the case. If you're positive enough and you work hard and you demonstrate, your skills, your mindset, your abilities, then anything's possible. So listen, I am super grateful we had Dan on Engine Mode 11. Dan, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me mostly on Twitter, and that's at Engine Mode 11. And I've started doing some bits on YouTube, which again, Engine Mode 11 on YouTube. And yeah, send me anything you want on Twitter, and I'll help. And yeah, that's where you'll find me.
Dan, you are a legend and a superstar. And, big shout out as well to Georgina for every week. It seems like we just have VIPs just coming in and just like chopping it up with us. It's so awesome to see. And even just for me, just like a normal guy that's just been following the sport for a couple of years, but I've got no experience like going to actual real race weekend or even working with the teams. I like take away so much from these sessions, and I'm so thankful for your time as well on this episode as well, Dan. We'll have to have you back on later on in the year at some stage
definitely
to do a part 2. But until the meantime, guys, it's been your boy Amg Denz, aka Denzel Clarkson, on Georgina's Stripping the Dipping. We hope that you have an excellent week. Stay positive, stay humble, stay focused, and as well as that, try and enjoy it. Have fun. Don't take things too seriously. Make sure that you put and save enough time there to do the things that you enjoy in life as well. And we'll be looking forward to 5 Lights Down Under at Melbourne. Until next time, take it easy, guys.